Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 of the Disgruntled Geeks podcast. And I think that I have officially have my mic on everywhere it needs to be on tonight.
So you think.
So I think, considering last week's episode and the interview that is going to be out with Hollywood Jimmy Blaylock by the time that you hear this. And if you have not heard that interview yet, when you hear this episode, you need to go back and listen to that interview with Jimmy Blaylock. Me and Jimmy got to talk about some really awesome things, like the time that Scott Steiner nearly killed a guy in the ring here in Mississippi. So, especially if you're from our area, like the Tupelo area, he's got some really awesome stories. So go back and listen to that. But now let's get to what's going on right now,
Right
episode
now.
6.
What's
And
going on in episode 6?
well, this week it's just me and you, Ben.
Oh, yeah, it is. There's no third person.
So I am Ronnie, your one of your two regular weekly hosts, and I do have Ben with me again this week,
Yeah, this
uh,
week.
and it's just going to be us. So no
Right, so.
special third guest, but that's actually me and Ben were talking about that. We kind of want that. We kind of want that occasionally, where it's just going to be me and him,
Yeah.
because that was I talk sometimes about how the podcast kind of the idea behind the podcast when we started, and that's one of the things we wanted to do was just be able to have conversations that we normally have,
Yep.
but just where people can hear it. So you're going to get a little bit of that tonight because we're going to be talking a little bit about some things that me and Ben are both extremely passionate about. So
Yeah, things we actually like.
yeah, instead of you know
I mean, we can
WWE
be
wrestling,
disgruntled at them at times, but usually we like these things. So
right?
that's why we're talking about.
Well, Ben, you're the one that kind of knows a little bit more about some of the things that TV said. But what was it that TV said about the difference between being a fan and a fanboy?
The difference is if you're a fan, you have no problems criticizing the thing that you're a fan of and pointing out the ways in which you can be better. A fanboy is when you are just blindly follow any sort of adjustments that a IP you love will make and think, oh, it's all the greatest thing ever.
Right, right. So it's like basically as a fan, like you love what that hobby or that intellectual property that you're enjoying, but you love it enough that you're willing to go, hey, this is making it worse.
Yep.
And so, that's kind of. I mean, I like to think that I fit into that with most things. I'll typically admit, I've said it before. It's like, yeah, I'm a fanboy about this. So,
I mean, it
uh,
can be difficult. Like, it's very hard to criticize things that you like because that amount, you're trying to turn off that bias.
right, right,
And I
um,
mean, yeah, you and I are both fanboys of particular things, and things are just like, it's a guilty pleasure that I'm a fanboy of this.
exactly. Which I will say one of the things I'm a fanboy of is this podcast.
uh,
Well, of course,
there has to be one, right?
yeah, we have to have at least one fanboy. So I'm filling the void for now. Like,
For now,
I
until a
think,
more qualified individual steps up.
hey, I think we have at least one fangirl, and that's
Okay, well,
Mia. She's like
oh
she's
yeah.
constantly posting stuff. So shout out to Mia Mahandro.
Hi,
Um,
Mia.
and so also she did leave a comment about our discussion about Jurassic World last week.
Oh yeah, I think I remember seeing that.
Right. So I'm gonna go ahead and read that because that's the promise. Like if you tell me how you disagree with me, I'm gonna tell you or I'm gonna put it out there on the podcast. And
All right,
so
we'll throw it out there.
so what Mia wrote was so I'm not gonna do the whole opinion thing because it's late and I don't feel like typing the whole thing. I think she typed this like immediately after the episode came out.
Yeah, you got to
Um,
get it right when it's fresh. So I understand this.
So she said, "You do realize that the T Rex from Jurassic World is the same one in the original Jurassic Park, right?" I actually did not realize that.
I had no
Um,
idea either.
and so, thanks for pointing that out. And actually, one could argue that even though she basically chased the heroes for most of the original movie, the real villain was in fact the raptors. Because if you recall, the Rex saved the heroes from them in that movie, so technically that whole concept did not start with Jurassic World. Okay, well, here's the thing, man. I actually went back and I watched the original Jurassic Park again after you left this comment.
Right.
And the thing is the T Rex at some point in the movie was the antagonist
Hmm.
in Jurassic Park. In Jurassic World, he never was. In Jurassic
Yeah.
World 2, he never was. So you have the part where like he's pushing it and trying to get the kids out of the top of the Jeep.
Mhm.
So while it's okay for us to disagree on this, but it's still like I still stand by the fact that like he is purely a protagonist in Jurassic World. They've
Mhm.
taken that he's going to save the heroes thing and ran with it because he did attack the raptors. So good point on that too.
That's true.
I don't actually see her as a villain or hero either. She's an animal, which we agree on that. She's a force of nature.
Yep.
She's got
Fair
to eat.
point.
It's
She
not her
does.
fault. She's a carnivore, and humans are food to her.
Yes, they are.
Again, we can agree on that. Like Dr. Wu said, monster is a relative term. To a canary, a cat is a monster, and we're used to being the cat. Just food for thought. So definitely thanks, Mia, for putting your opinion out there. That's what we want
Yeah,
from you guys.
and
So
good fair points too.
yeah, exactly. We can disagree on how they've handled the T Rex, but I just didn't like it. So, but
Well,
thank you,
about all there is.
thank you for putting that out there for us.
About all there is to it.
So Ben,
Yo,
what have you been up to this week?
I've been hunting other animals that are carnivores in Monster Hunter World. Kind
Yes,
of going
game's
up
so
against
fun.
monsters of my own. Yeah, it was, I've finally managed to get the Xeno'jiiva optional quest to spawn, which you don't know what that is yet, but it's one of the end game bosses. But I needed a horn off of it, and the quest would never spawn, and it finally did, and I got not one but two horns off of him. So now I have a fully upgraded Nergigante tree insect glaive called Catastrophe's Light,
All right,
which
so
is
uh,
so good.
let me break this down for those of y'all that don't know Monster Hunter World. He fought a big monster that
Yes,
you don't get a quest for that often,
right.
and he got multiple drops off of it that let him upgrade his weapon so that
Yep.
he can kill even bigger monsters.
Yeah, it's Monster Hunter has the MMO thing where you fight monsters to get better loot, to fight better monsters to get better loot.
Right. What you know? So you're starting to get really into the end game now
I'm
with
starting to get into
monsters.
the end game proper, yeah. Which that has involves. So there's the low rank, which is where you're at, which is like the first half of the story, and
Right.
then you get into high rank, which is about the end of the story proper, because the last thing you fight is Xeno'jiiva. Spoilers. And that's when you kind of have a conclusion to what passes for Monster Hunter World story.
Right.
Like I like the gameplay, but oh my god, the story's terrible. It's
Oh
just
yeah.
you can't follow it.
Yeah. That is one thing that I haven't played much. I've probably put 3-4 hours into the game,
Yeah,
and it's like what story?
yeah. Like I'm not the person. I'm not like Malcolm who skips cutscenes because of what Metal Gear Solid has done to his brain. But this was the first game where I finally understood, because every time there was just some sort of cutscene, it was just like skip, skip, skip. Oh my god, I don't care, skip. And
It,
like the handler's the worst character. The handler is so awful.
it's funny. You brought up Metal Gear Solid, and I had to say this because it comes to mind. Okay,
Mhm.
every Metal Gear Solid game you play is like a 40 to 50 hour game the first time you play it, and your
Yep.
second playthrough it's like a 7 hour game because you skip all the cutscenes.
Yeah, although
So,
Kojima seemed to get much worse with that later on, and I think he was purposefully doing it in four
oh
because
god,
of his relationship with Konami at that point.
four was just 4 was just a
Four
terrible,
was what I
just a
imagine
movie.
David Cage, yeah, what he wants games to be, where it's just mostly movie. But I digress. Monster Hunter. So in the actual end game, once you get past Xeno'jiiva, you start getting investigations for what are called tempered monsters, which in other games, I think in 4 Ultimate there was G rank after high rank, and this is what sort of passes for that. Tempered monsters are monsters that have a more metallic sheen to them
Right.
because they've lasted so long in the new world that they've started accumulating the bioenergy that is prevalent in the elder dragons there. So it's basically the monsters that have lived the longest are starting to come out now.
So
And these are the ones that are really tough.
wait. So essentially they're absorbing like some kind of radiation.
Yeah, basically.
So the monsters you're fighting are essentially Godzilla.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
I mean, Zora Magdaros is essentially a Godzilla character
Right.
when you
Right.
first see him. You've seen Zora, so you know who he is.
Right.
The volcano.
Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah. The big walking volcano
Yeah.
thing.
The big walking volcano. He's straight out of a Godzilla movie.
I kind of want to see Godzilla fight that guy now. Like
Yeah,
just
wouldn't that be great?
just grow him up a little bit bigger because obviously Godzilla's huge.
Yeah.
But yeah, just throw him into a Godzilla movie.
It's weird talking about a monster that has a literal volcano on its back and saying, yeah, he needs to be a bit bigger.
Well, yeah. Well, especially like with the new Godzilla movie, like
True.
man, they made Godzilla like nearly double the size that he's ever
If
been.
if Godzilla was ever in Monster Hunter as some sort of weird cross promotion, like that would be the first 40 hunter quest.
Yeah.
So, because like right now it's only 4 people max, which is fine. That's a good number for it.
Right. Right.
But yeah, tempered monsters. So you fight them, and that's where you really start to get the good decorations that give you access to skills you don't get just through the armor. So that way you can get into some of the really crazy sort of end game builds for the different weapons.
Okay.
And then there's also I haven't done this yet, but there's the Kove Taroth, which is Gold Dust the monster, and
That's kind of frightening to think about.
a little bit, but it's just very gold. The rest is just up to your imagination, really.
Right.
But I mean, I just imagine every time it shows up, Gold Dust theme starts playing because it's just
Shattered Dreams.
yeah, it's just all gold. But you fight it, and it apparently has some of the best armor weapons in the game. And it's a multiplayer. I think you can do it solo, but it's usually recommended as like the multiplayer because that's the Kol Taroth siege, not a hunt.
Yeah. Well, I will say anything. Anyways, with Monster Hunter is like if you're gonna get that game anyways, like try to get it with friends because of the fact
Yeah,
that it's not as fun to play alone. Like I
not really.
I tried to pick it up just to play by myself. After I'd played a couple of times with you, and it was just like after that, it's like, oh well, this is kind of sad. Just you know,
I
um,
think like what helped me was I just really got into the mindset of this is a hunt and it's between me and the monster. So it's mano a mano, only the strongest will leave the area.
right.
And I just really get into that aspect. And so that's why it's like I don't mind so much playing single player, but I do have a lot more fun with the multiplayer because you get a lot of the crazy sort of stories that come out of hunts in that mode.
Right, and so you also got to think like with Monster Hunter, it's not like your typical RPG. You're not going to go into a battle and be done with it in two
Right.
minutes.
No.
It's going to be a 30-minute affair,
Yeah.
and you're going to be struggling, and it's going to be like you're fighting for your life against that daggum thing. And that honestly
Correct.
took me a minute to adjust to, because it's really funny. It's kind of the same. It has a lot of the same gameplay features as Dark Souls, which if anybody listens to
I know.
this show, they know I love Dark Souls.
I know for a fact that there are people who legitimately get pissed off at that comparison,
Oh,
who are just like, "Oh my God, it's not Dark Souls!" Just they lose their mind.
well, I'm gonna make every single one of those people mad because I love Dark Souls and the game plays a lot like Dark
Yeah.
Souls, and
Yeah.
so
I think it's on both sides, honestly. Just be like purists in the Dark Souls and the Monster Hunter communities.
right. Which I mean, there's a lot of differences. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But it's very similar gameplay. You
Yeah.
have invincibility frames when you're rolling. You have I mean, they're difficult games. I mean, there's just so many things that the games share.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main problem is that we're all suffering from the fatigue of quote unquote journalists using it's the Dark Souls of X as like a descriptor for a game, and we're finally coming to a game where it's like that actually is a fitting description.
Right. And really, even then, like, that was actually one of my problems when I first started playing Monster Hunter World is the
Yep.
fact that it did feel so much like Dark Souls that I was making mistakes because I was trying to play it
Ah.
like Dark Souls. And
Yep.
the thing is it's not. At the end of the day, like, I can sit here and compare the two, but they're not the exact same thing.
No.
And so maybe, if I've got anybody coming at me with pitchforks because I compared the two, maybe that calms them down some.
Yeah, maybe.
Because if you try to play either one of those games like the other, you're not going to do well.
Well, I know that one of my futile quests in terms of like things that I've been trying to do is I've been trying to get into Bloodborne, and the main problem I have is because I've played so much Monster Hunter, I know that the dodge button in Monster Hunter is bound to X. In
Oh,
Bloodborne, it's circle.
right.
And that just throws me for a loop, and I can't get it out of my head.
Well, imagine like since you played a little bit of Bloodborne, like you don't have shields or anything in Bloodborne. Imagine going
Right.
from like Dark Souls where you have shields
Yeah.
to try to play. Because
I was actually,
Ugh.
before I got the dodge thing, before I got the dodge button screwed up in my head, I was kind of used to that because I play Insect Glaive
Right.
in Monster Hunter, and the best defense is to not get hit.
Yeah,
So
well,
there was like, okay, I can kind of play around that, but then the button feedback just happened in my brains, and now I can't do it anymore.
yeah, it's and that happens. I find myself all the time like when I play a different game from Dark Souls because I always go back to Dark Souls, and then like that game's like having the buttons on it just messes me up
Yeah.
from the other games.
Well, I know that you and I should definitely get some Monster Hunter played. If not just by ourselves, then maybe we could stream it.
Oh,
I'm
ooh,
winking at the. They won't see this in the MP3
yeah.
or whatever, but
See,
I'm
that's
winking suggestively.
for all of you that are listening to this on iTunes or Stitcher or TuneIn or all the other different places that you can get the podcast. This is why you should come onto Twitch and hang out with us because then you get all the extra stuff like me waving my hands everywhere and Ben
Yeah.
winking at you. And everybody wants to be winked at by Ben.
Sure.
I'm looking at you, Wit.
Yeah,
uh,
it's true though.
inside jokes on a podcast because that
Oh yeah,
works. Uh,
yeah.
so,
Especially when you don't include the audience.
right. Hey, you know what's a really bad segue?
Okay, what's that?
You were talking about insect glaives, and I watched Ant-Man this week.
Oh wow, that's terrible.
I
God, that
warned you.
must be one of the worst.
I warned you.
Well, you lived up to expectations, so congratulations.
So that's pretty much what I've been up to this week. Has been sitting here contemplating how Ant-Man made me feel existentially.
That's a lot of thought to put in toward a movie about a guy whose power is he shrinks and has fun times with
That
ants.
also has an ant playing drums in it.
Okay.
Can I say before I get into talking about the movie? I
Are
know
you
I
sure you didn't
talked
watch A Bug's Life?
right exactly. Like, I talked about this last week with when Chris was on with us, but like, do not put an ant playing drums in your trailer if you want to make some people excited to watch it, especially if you're trying to get people to take your movie seriously.
Yeah, really.
Now it is explained a little bit better on why the ant was in the movie, but still, it's like that's just silly. But you know what is going to absolutely surprise people who listen to this podcast?
What's that?
I actually kind of enjoyed it.
That is staggering news. That's probably the most hard-hitting news we've ever had on this show.
Right?
Is that you enjoyed Ant-Man of all Marvel movies?
Yeah, because I hated the first
Ant-Man
one.
2. Yeah. That's why it's so staggering, because it was like, this is a piece of garbage. Whereas your exact words for Ant-Man 1.
Right. And so, well, first thing, let's make sure that we don't get all the SJWs after us. It's Ant-Man and the Wasp.
That's true.
So,
In fact, it's weird because of those two, I've been much more a bigger fan of Wasp than Ant-Man.
yeah, which this is a very different Wasp than what we've ever got in the comics.
Yeah.
Being Hope Van Dyne instead of Janet. Mainly
Yeah,
because they're
that's
doing the whole story with, like, this is old Hank, and we figure out what happened to Janet in this movie.
And also, Disney does not want to do any domestic abuse storylines in their movies.
Oh, but they allude to it very heavily in this
Do
movie.
they?
Oh, they do.
Wow, I'm
Because
proud of them,
Bill
then.
Foster calls him out in this movie, and it is wonderful. That's one
Cool.
of the things I really like is the fact that this is a really good interpretation of, like, them doing Hank Pym in the movie, but him not being the main character and
Yeah.
still being truthful to the character, being truthful to the character of Hank Pym. They are
Oh,
not
wow.
making him a nice guy. They are not making him a good guy. They are making him just as much of a douchebag as what he is in the comics. And I'm really proud that they were willing to go that way with
Yeah,
it.
really. Gold star, Disney.
So, but, even though I really enjoyed it,
All right.
there were some issues
here it is.
that I had with it. I don't want to do spoilers because obviously I'm sure there's a lot of people that haven't seen the movie yet. But it gets a little hokey at the end.
You don't say.
I'll put it this way without spoiling anything. The big thing with Janet Pimp or Janet Van Dyne at the end is really cheesy, and when it happened, and you'll know what I'm talking about when you watch it. I was just like, "Oh, Disney, this is not Frozen."
Did your
This is
eyes
not
roll out
Tangled.
of your head?
Well, they almost literally did. Like,
Yeah.
thankfully, I had someone there to catch them for me. So
Oh, that's very nice of them.
but outside of the movie the script was kind of poor. I think it was really poorly paced. I think they wanted to get some of the comedy in there without or they wanted Ant-Man to be a comedy movie. Let me put it that way. And so they made the comedy the central part of the script in times when it didn't need to be. Because you would have like the pacing would just be ramping up, and it would be just be like hitting you in the face, and then all of a sudden you have, all of a sudden the Ant-Man's little sidekick dude that he went to prison with all of a sudden pops up and tells like a 10-minute joke.
Disney has really had a problem with doing that too much.
Right.
In a lot of their movies lately.
Right. I mean, and I haven't seen Solo, but my understanding is that movie did the same thing.
And that's why I haven't seen it.
And I'm sorry, but it just that makes for bad pacing. When you slow your movie to a halt to tell a joke, and to spend an entire scene telling a joke, I will say this: truth serum. And if you watch the movie, you'll understand the truth serum scene. Like, there was no reason that scene took as long as it did.
Truth serum in general, just as a trope, just leads to really kind of cringy nonsense at best.
Well, they actually handle it well. They handle it well.
No, do
they? Because of the fact that, like, actually, I don't want to spoil completely what's going on, but I'll kind of give you the general setup here. You have the Hispanic guy who is Scott Lang's friend,
right?
And he knows where Scott is, and some mobsters show up wanting to know where he is, and they're like, "Oh, this serum that we have makes you more suggestible." And the guy's like, "Oh, so it's truth serum." And the mobsters who are giving him the serum go, "No, it's not truth serum. There's no such thing. That's ridiculous." And then he's like, "But it makes me tell you the truth, right?" And they're like, "Well, yes, it makes you very, suggestible." And he's like, "Oh, so it is truth serum then." So if they would have kind of kept it in that amount, but they spend the whole scene doing this over and over again until the point to where he gets injected with it, and then he's like, "Oh, wow, I am telling you the truth. It really is truth serum." And then there's a payoff to the joke later, but the scene just didn't need to be 10 minutes long.
This is me laughing at the joke. Do you see it?
Right. Well, they tell the joke.
Real close. Do you see it?
Which, I'm going to be fair, my delivery of it wasn't the greatest. Their delivery of it was way better than what I mean,
I'm sure they get paid to deliver jokes like that.
Right. They're actual comedians, and I'm just some random guy with a mic, so.
Well, yeah. But I'm sure if you got paid for it, you'd put a lot more effort into it.
Exactly. But, I mean, I will say this is probably my second favorite Marvel movie.
So, high praise.
But it is not, it is in the bottom half of Marvel movies when it comes to technically how good it is. It's not a well-made movie.
You left entertained, basically.
Yes, I left very entertained. I left happy. And hey, that makes it worth my $10 that I spent to get in.
Yeah, sometimes that's enough.
I will say this, kind of final thoughts on it. The greatest thing about the movie is that it's exactly what it was advertised as, Ant-Man and the Wasp. There was no extra Marvel heroes. There were no extra villains. There was no, extra world building outside of what's going on with Ant-Man and the Wasp. And that felt really refreshing, considering Marvel has spent so much time in their previous movies, going, "Oh, look, it's the Hulk in the Thor movie, and it's, oh, it's Tony Stark in Spider-Man." And like, thank you for finally just giving me the hero you said you were going to give me, or the heroes with Ant-Man and the Wasp. And Evangeline Lilly freaking knocked it out of the park. So,
good for her.
So moving along, kind of onto our main topic this week. We want to talk, we kind of allude to, or have alluded to multiple times in the last few weeks, some of our favorite hobby games.
Sure.
And this isn't necessarily going to be, we're kind of excluding video games from this because we've talked a lot about video games over the last several weeks.
It's an easy topic.
Exactly. But this is going to be more about like miniatures, or board games, those kind of things. And we really
card games even.
Yeah, card games. Ooh, Magic the Gathering.
See, that's your jam.
Yeah, not anymore.
Arena.
Well, yeah. I haven't even played that much lately,
no.
Sadly. I'm waiting for the new update.
Your schedule's also been wonky, too. So.
Oh, God, I don't want to talk about that. I sleep so much when I'm not at work. It's terrible.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to kill time till the update.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, so, obviously we've talked about, like, Ben plays Legion.
I do.
I used to play Magic. Still salty about that. Still salty.
As you should be.
But but also like, and this is kind of where I want to start the conversation was on board games,
Okay.
because that is, so many people actually enjoy board games, but nobody ever really talks about board games a whole lot. You'll
It's
see it
because most
occasionally.
people suffer from Monopoly PTSD.
Oh gosh, yes. Which it's like the people who, what's the strategy where people like basically close out the housing market by never buying hotels, and it's like the worst strategy you could do to
Yeah,
people in
there's like a couple
Monopoly.
articles on like here's the surefire way to win Monopoly and lose all your friends.
It's more like the surefire way to get punched in the face.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just what Monopoly is a way to get yourself punched in the face.
And that's the thing is like there's this misconception that board games are like what that constitutes is life, monopoly, and risk. Like that there's nothing else beyond like these old school board games.
I'll have you know
And
that's not true. There's Candyland.
oh yeah, Candyland. You can't forget that one. Or that was my monopoly as a child. Like I wanted to punch my sister so many times over that game, but mainly because she was 4 years older than me, so played it a lot better. And
Yeah,
yeah, okay, I don't,
it's the older
don't-
sibling effect.
exactly. So, but now board games have really evolved a lot.
They have.
Especially like within the last 10 years, it seems that there's been a lot of effort by companies to really provide some new and interesting ways to play board games.
You even start to see trends in development in terms of if the game was developed in North America or if it was actually developed in Europe. Like there's certain mechanics that seem to be very favored in one region versus the other.
Right, which that's pretty typical of almost like any development company.
Mhm.
Um,
It's just
but
weird to think about that for board games.
yeah, most people just aren't aware that that goes on.
Hmm.
So Ben,
Yo,
I want to hit some specifics. Like
okay,
let's go with three.
sure.
And we'll just discuss them one by one. Like, what are your three favorite board games? Because Ben is, let me tell you something. Ben's got a huge board game collection.
It's decent.
Well, it's huge compared to mine of like two.
Fair enough.
So, and he's kind of the board game connoisseur in
Out
our
of
group
us
of
too.
friends. So,
Yeah. um, so if I have to pick three out of the collection that I have, I think I'll start with what I consider to be one of the premier gateway board games, which is to kind of bring people back into the fold
right.
after Monopoly sent them running to the hills, and that's Ticket to Ride.
Oh, that game is so fun.
Yeah,
Like,
that's it won basically the German equivalent of board game Oscars in 2004, I think. The original Ticket to Ride. There's been a lot of versions out now playing on different maps, but that's because it just plays really solid. It's very simple to teach and set up and play immediately. And it's also just visually pleasing to look at in play and at the end of the game because you're basically just a railroad tycoon trying to build railroads across the United States or Europe or India or whatever other versions are out there.
right.
And it's got the European style scoring where you can have somebody really far ahead in the game, but they may end up being last place by the time scoring comes around because of how it works with the tickets and if you completed your routes or not.
Right. So essentially, you get like a number of routes when you start the game that are
You get
kind of
three.
like your goals to get these specific train routes through
Yep.
whatever country you're doing the game,
Mhm.
which is really interesting. Um, I have a story to say on games that have that scoring system, but I know one of the games you're bringing up, and I'm going to save it for then.
Okay.
But I always found the European like that was kind of I didn't really like it. I'll be honest.
You didn't?
Like the scoring system
Mhm.
when I first played it, and we were because I can remember we were me and Ben were roommates once upon a time years ago,
It was a while ago.
and we were playing it in our apartment. And like when you first brought it out and were telling me that's how the scoring system worked, it really was a turnoff for me.
Really?
But then when we got to the end and actually scored it up, I saw the genius of it. And
Yeah.
so that's the reason why I'm bringing that up. Like if you hear that and you go, "Oh, that doesn't make any sense," like
Mhm.
give it a try. Like go out, play the game. There are there's a lot of card shops and game shops that this is one of the games that they have for people to play for free. And really it's worth the buy. So go
I
off
will
the ledge and
say
buy it.
I will say also that unlike a lot of unlike Monopoly, I'll keep coming back to this, where different versions are just the same game with a new coat of paint.
Right.
The other versions actually add new mechanics to the game. So Ticket to Ride Europe, for example, it adds ferry routes, tunnels, and train stations, which are not present in the original version. And to kind of quickly run down what those are, the ferry routes are routes where you have your wild cards, your locomotives, which are normally used to get like just complete any route no matter what.
Right.
The ferry routes require you to have at least one in order to use the route.
Okay.
So you need it to complete it rather than just using it for anything that's just kind of like a vanity project apart from your tickets. The tunnels are things where you have to like there's a wager system in terms of what cards come off the top of the deck when you build it, and you have to have extra cards in order to beat it, otherwise the tunnel collapses and you don't get the route. So going after them can be risky but often rewarding. And then the last thing, which is a major improvement over the original in my opinion, are the train stations, where oftentimes you go to complete a route and your fellow gamers, unbeknownst to them, or they do it on purpose, they block you from getting your route. Well, that will either cost you points, or you put a train station down in the city where it is,
Right.
and that route will now count for you because it goes through your station.
Okay.
Now, that said, there is something where the less train stations you use, the more bonus points you get for that.
Okay.
So there is a sort of balance to it, but they do have workarounds from some of the sort of errors, for lack of a better word, that are apparent in the original version.
Yeah.
But both versions are still very good to play.
Well, that's really you talk about like Monopoly and how different versions of the game really are just the same game, but really
Yep.
any expansion or new version of the game, that's what it should be, is like enhancing the game, making it better, refining it. Because I think it's Mark Rosewater that talked about it one time with Magic development, is that there's like 20 of us that are developing the game,
Right.
and there's thousands of you that are playing the game. So
Yep.
it's hard to find everything before you release a game. But that's
That's
good
true.
that a company is able to refine things whenever they release and say, hey, we're going to make expansions to refine this.
I mean, they have to sort of, because the different versions of the game need to take place in other places of the world because the US doesn't have a train system anymore. Not
Right.
really, anyway. So modern day Tickets Ride would be very depressing
Yeah.
if you like trains anyway. But should we go on to the next game?
Yeah. What's the next one?
Well, I think this one's on your list also, but it's got to be Lords of Waterdeep.
Oh yes, Lord. Like we actually, for those that have been following us since we started, we did a video on Ben's birthday, where we were playing some games. Which, of course, what you saw was probably the most irreverent game in his collection.
Probably.
Woo! We went from PG-13 to R, just like boom.
And
Like,
said goodbye to any immediate potential sponsorships.
right, right. And
Those
then,
may come later.
but one of the things we played after that was Lords of Waterdeep, and that was just a
Yep.
really fun. This is the first time I'd ever played it, and I mean, a game that is so simple to learn, but is it really seemed really deep. Like
Yep.
there's a lot to it, even though it's like really just hey, you tell your dude that you want him to do one of these few things.
Yep. It's a, I'm sure that there's an actual term for it, but you have, okay. So the basic synopsis of the game is that it takes place in Waterdeep, which is a city in the Forgotten Realms version of Dungeons and Dragons, in that sort of universe. And in D&D, there's usually the people who go out on adventures and quests, and that's usually who you play as. But in Lords of Waterdeep, you're the quest giver because you have quests that you're trying to complete for your Lord of Waterdeep so that they gain control of the city
Right.
by their influence. So you have agents, these little meeple guys, pretend I'm holding one, and you tell them, okay, go to the training yard, recruit warriors, go to the wizard's tower, recruit mages, go here, get money. And you do this about 2 times for most of the rounds. After the 5th, you get a 3rd one. And you guys just take turns basically accruing up the resources to complete quests to gain influence in the city.
Right. And this is actually what I mentioned a while ago. I want to tell a story because that has that European scoring system as well.
It does.
But you remember in that game, I was behind almost the entire game. Like I was in like either second to last or last place most of the game.
Yep.
And there's different what are they different lords that you play,
Yeah,
and I got the lord who was the builder.
you got like the unique lord out of all the others.
So like the whole idea is like I'm just wanting to build buildings around the city, and
Yeah,
that's
you did.
essentially what I did. Like
You sure did.
I would not give up like the first turn
I
thing.
didn't become salty about that until the end of the game because when I sit next to you and you had first player for most of the game, I
Right,
was the last person to act.
right.
And oh,
I'm
that got
sorry. I'm
no,
so
no, it's
sorry.
not your fault. It just got irritating because Jamie sitting next to me went everywhere I wanted to go.
And Jamie's not here to defend himself
No, no, no. But at the same time, it's also remarkable that out of all the people who played, it got to him, the
every
person
time.
right before me, he would go where I wanted to go. Like not
But
Robbie, not Wit, not Malcolm wasn't there, not any of them, but Jamie.
yeah, well that's what Jamie's good at though. So
Yeah, like getting a thundering onyx cloud serpent before me and then never playing WoW again.
oh, that was terrible.
Ugh.
But we but yes,
Some wounds never heal.
so like that was like the time when I really started buying into not because I won the game because I ended up winning, but because of the fact that I saw it because I went in knowing it's like okay I'm the builder. Um, Here are the things that I want to focus on going into the game. Is like I
Yeah,
want to make sure that the first thing that happens every turn is that I build something,
right.
and then from there it's like what is my priority after that? And after a few turns of seeing how the game worked, I was able to actually start coming up with a game plan as far as like what are my priorities every turn. Like what do I want to focus on? And there was even like quests were my last priority, but there was a
Yeah,
turn where I finally like completed a huge quest but it's because I had everything else done, and it really like I think that's what that European system really um, rewards
hmm,
is when you actually play ahead of what instead of just thinking this turn on what am I doing this turn, you start thinking what am I doing over the next several turns,
yeah,
or for my next several moves, and I think that system is really interesting for that because you also have people who may start playing sloppy because they're ahead who might start making
yeah.
weird decisions
That that
because they're ahead.
that can actually happen. Like it sneaks up on you that oh right, there's post game scoring,
Right.
and that's gonna bite me in the butt.
But that's really what finally sold me on European scoring systems was that game,
Yeah,
and it's just
I love Lords of Waterdeep. Like it is. Like Ticket to Ride, sort of. It is one of the games that on a game night, I'm more than happy to break it out and play it.
and what's great is that they're like both of these games, Ticket to Ride and Lords of Waterdeep, are they're low stress games where you're playing against each other. It's not like
Yep.
Monopoly where it gets super competitive.
No,
Like you can
like
have fun
I've
with each other.
played a lot of Lords of Waterdeep. I've never won a game, but I've loved playing it every time.
Exactly. And that was the thing is like, even though I won, like I was telling, Jamie, because he's like, well, Ronnie's already won the last couple of turns. And I'm like, I really don't know. I'm just having fun, dude.
Yeah,
Like, I'm doing what I'm
and
supposed
I
to
mean,
do.
he ended up taking second.
Right.
So it's like you may think you can write yourself out of a game on like halfway through it in a game like Ticket to Ride or Lords of Waterdeep, but you really don't have any idea how good you're doing until the game's over. So there's no reason to just give up halfway through. That's a surefire way to make sure you lose.
Right. And you know what really was fun about it is it's not stressful.
No.
I love Risk. Risk is one of my favorite board games ever, but
Mhm.
that's a really stressful game. Um,
Yeah.
it is like super
Well,
stressful.
that.
But this game, even though you're competing against other people, it really doesn't have that stress factor that you get from other games. And
I
that
mean,
could
really, sending adventurers to their death is a lot less stressful than trying to take over the world.
right, right. Which I mean, you could actually look at that as either being a good thing or a bad thing,
Yeah.
because of the fact that that is one of the fun parts of Risk. Is I mean, it's in the name Risk.
Yep.
Is that stress factor, and that
That's
stress
right.
factor is a positive when it comes to that game. Uh,
Well, if you let's finish up Waterdeep because the stress thing is the perfect segue for my third pick.
oh no, I know where you're going. Okay, so Lords of Waterdeep.
Lords
I'm,
of Waterdeep.
I'm
If you
stressed
if
out
you've
now.
seen it, one last thing I'll say about Lords of Waterdeep. My favorite thing to tell people is that the game looks more complicated than it actually is.
Yeah, it really is simple.
Yeah,
And
deceptively so.
I think it's a good family game.
It really is. My cousins love it, and we play it every Christmas. It seems.
So if you've got a family, you got, I mean, even like, younger kids, I wouldn't say like too young, but like in that 8 and
No.
above range,
Yeah.
I think it'd be a pretty good game for
If
a
they're
family night.
already if they already show like really good sort of skill at being able to follow rules in games and keep up with them, then yeah, Lords of Waterdeep I recommend.
So what's the third one? Oh God.
Okay.
Oh God.
Well, I already hinted that stress is the segue. So I'm going to turn your attention from the what we usually come to expect from board games, which is competitiveness and that it's you versus the other people at the board, to a game type that I really didn't think about until sort of getting back into board games, which is cooperative board games. Games where it's you and your friends versus the game, which helps take a lot of stress out of board games, really. Except for this one. I'm
Oh
speaking,
yeah.
of course, of Pandemic.
Oh, that's actually not where I thought you were going.
Where were you going? Where do you think I was going?
Eldritch Horror.
Oh, no, I'm not doing that one.
Okay.
I'm going with Pandemic. I don't
Oh,
think we've played it.
I haven't played it, but I have heard
Oh, God.
a ton about it.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the game. This is one of, it's his first, or it's probably the premier game who's come out from Matt Leacock. He's the designer and developer of it. He also developed Forbidden Island and Forbidden Desert, which kind of play the same way.
Right.
But his games are common in the sense that there is one way to win and literally dozens of ways to lose.
Oh, I hate those kind of games.
But
They're so
he
fun
designs them
but
so
stressful.
well. Yeah, my sister Molly has gone on quote saying like that's the game that has stressed her out more than anything else, and that's like the game that, and we won when she and I played it. But
Right.
she's like, we won, and she's like, I don't want to ever play it again.
Well, I mean, obviously from the name, I think people can kind of infer what the game is about.
Yeah.
But give some details on what the game is.
Okay, so the world is under siege from 4 different diseases, which are unnamed and are kind of left up to the players at the table to decide what they are. So, of course, the zombie plague is usually always one. The stupid or the herpaderps is another. Just anything you can think of as like what a disease is. I'm sure like you can make some political and religious jokes, but we're not doing that on this podcast, so I'm going to leave that up to your imagination. But there's 4 diseases going through the world, and you guys play as different roles on the team that is working to create vaccines for these diseases. And throughout the game, different areas of the world are going to become more and more infected by these diseases, and outbreaks will occur. And when an outbreak occurs, it can chain react into having more outbreaks go into different regions.
Oh.
So, like, say there is an outbreak in, I don't know I can't remember all the cities, but let's say there's one in Seoul, South Korea. So there's an outbreak there, and you put one of the disease cubes there, and it reaches threshold. Well, that causes a chain reaction to connecting cities that are connected by airports or just ship ports or whatever, and it goes to Tokyo, and it goes to Beijing, and other things like that. Well, Tokyo has an outbreak, it goes to Los Angeles, and suddenly now there's an outbreak in the United States compared to Asia, and the whole world is a dying, diseased mess. And it's up to your vague superpower hours of having 2 actions a turn to get rid of all of these disease cubes.
Yeah, that just sounds stressful.
It is. I think the genius of it is the fact that there is a deck of cards that decides what areas get infected. So when you start a game, you flip over cards that reveal cities that start with a good number of infection cubes. And then there are cards in there that are called outbreak cards, which is when that happens, you take your discard pile and shuffle it back in the deck. And then you reveal number of cards based on the outbreak meter. And that's when you can get cards that you've previously played back again. So things that you had thought were safe because they're in the discard pile suddenly aren't.
Right.
And it's just much more suspense of like, oh God, is he going to pull Mexico City or something like that when it's already got like enough cubes to have outbreaks occur.
Right. I mean, that's just like real life. Like you just never know where it's going to hit.
Right.
Even when you think it's safe.
Especially when you're like, okay, if we can do this, then we're on the verge of curing the zombie outbreak or something. All we got to do is get through these next 2 cards, no problem. So you draw the first one, okay, that's fine. Second one, outbreak. And that's when all your plans go to hell.
Right. But you know what that sounds like? It sounds like it really perfectly encapsulates like that when you have a movie where somebody's trying to keep a disease from spreading,
Yep.
like it really feels like it has like that disaster movie kind of feel to it, where it's like, you
Hmm.
know, you have 1 minute where you think everything is okay, and then the world just boom, you know.
Yeah, it all just
It's a
falls
really
apart.
bad movie, but the one that kind of comes to the forefront of my mind is like 2012 when they're at the airport and they're
Yeah.
about to fly off and everything's fine there, but then all of a sudden like everything just earthquakes and
Yep.
lava and everything just all of a sudden. That's kind of what that feels like.
It does, and it captures that feeling really well. His other games are they play the same way, it's just different premises. So Forbidden Island is you're all treasure hunters and you're trying to get these treasures off a sinking island. And it's not I don't think it's as fast paced as Pandemic, but it does have that creeping dread of the fact that it's like, look, this island's gonna be under the water pretty soon, sooner rather than later.
Right.
And then his other game, Forbidden Desert, is the spiritual successor to Forbidden Island, but sort of like how Ticket to Ride Europe and Ticket to Ride are compared, Forbidden Desert has a few different mechanics added to it. And the goal there is you're stranded in a desert, dying of thirst, and your only hope is to get an airship built so you can escape.
Okay.
So, but I mean, they both kind of have that same sense of dread, as in like something inevitable is happening, but it's not all collapsing immediately. Pandemic has that effect though, and it does it very well.
Right. Right. Which you know, I really need to play Pandemic. Now
Yeah,
you pretty much convinced me because it's like I'm probably going to be sitting there the entire time just not wanting to talk because when those games kind of stress me out.
yeah.
But at the same time, like
You go into like game mode. Like I gotta have a plan. Okay, what's the
right.
plan? We need to stick with it. I will say, like,
I'm such a spike.
if there is a downside, I think it is that you do have a bad effect of like somebody becoming sort of the quarterback and just calling all the plays and like only listening to that one person and not having really input from all of the players.
Well, the fact that that happens is actually really interesting because that is a psychological thing
Hmm.
that humans do. Like it is, uh, it's natural for there to be a leader to arise in a group
Sure,
because of the fact that that's just how we operate as humans. Better is with one person calling the shots.
that is
Um,
true.
and I mean, sure. There's, I'm sure you also have like occasionally the one person who's like the no, we're gonna go with this other plan,
Yeah,
and that may be like what he was aiming for was to like actually hit those psychographics within a group and make it even stressful for the players interacting with each other.
probably. And then I think I'll close out by saying, like, I've already told you about Pandemic, but he's also come out with Pandemic Legacy, which is like Risk Legacy, in which case it's an ongoing story
Oh yes,
added
those
to
are
the
always
game.
fun. I love legacy games.
Yeah, and Pandemic has one. It's apparently really, really good. And it has the thing of you have objectives in each month and you try to complete them. And if you do, great, you move on to the next one. If not, you get sort of a second chance at it. It also has the thing where certain characters will die and don't have access to that role anymore.
Oh wow.
So that can, like, if you're used to playing regular Pandemic and it's like, okay, the researcher and the dispatcher are like part of my A team. I haven't played forever, so don't crucify me if it turns out those guys aren't top tier or whatever. And like, turns out that's a crucial part of my strategy. But then your dispatcher catches the herpaderps and dies.
Uh
Like
no.
that would be a problem.
Yeah. We need to do that. We need to get Pandemic Legacy
We do.
and play it and have like a play group. Let's have a Disgruntled Geeks play group for some of our local people who listen to the podcast. See what we can't do for that.
Yeah, we could probably do it.
We could do updates. We may be able to record it.
Oh,
Ooh, ideas,
winking.
people.
I'm
I'm not
winking
making
horribly
any
again.
promises. Not making any promises on stuff.
Not
like that.
really. No,
But it would be fun. We could imagine.
it's a nice pipe dream.
So,
But those are my three.
but
I
if you
think.
you guys out there in listener land, if you want that, especially those that are local, like go to Facebook, leave a comment saying, hey, you want like some kind of board game play group for the community of the Disgruntled Geeks. We'll do it. I will absolutely do it. You know,
Yep.
so just let us know what you want. Ben, I wanted to. I did want to ask.
Okay.
Since we're on the topic of hobby gaming,
Yeah,
when in the world is X-Wing 2.0 coming?
September.
September. So
Yep.
we've still got like 2 months before it happens.
It's closing in.
So, are you excited?
I am. I am. I range from cautiously optimistic to excited. I have really been slacking on doing a bit of my research, but it seems like they're taking X-Wing in a direction that refreshes it a little bit, and also definitely shakes up the meta of harpoon torpedoes and ghosts with twin laser turret, or just ships with twin laser turret in general.
Right. So here's a question. This you may not have a good answer for this,
Okay.
and you may not have even thought about it. But
All right.
just like any other game, X-wing has a lot. Has a competitive scene,
It
but
does.
also has a lot of casual players.
Oh yeah.
Does X-wing 2.0 does it affect the casual player positively or negatively?
Does it affect the casual player positively?
Like, is this a
Um.
good jumping on point?
Oh, as in to like get into the game?
Well, let's start there, and then let's talk about the more enfranchised
Okay.
casual player.
Okay, so if you're looking to get into X-Wing, then absolutely 2.0 is a great place to start because everybody else around you is going to be catching up to learn the game as well.
Right.
And you have a great abundance of players to sort of help you learn the game, and they're all at the same point too. So it's not going to be like the master beating up the Padawan with his pinky.
Right.
It's more like it's going to be a more even playing field, and you're just going to have a better experience overall. And you're also not behind in your collection at all because all the new stuff's coming out, and you'll be able to start your collection there. And you won't feel like you have to put hundreds of dollars down immediately.
Right. Right.
So for somebody who's just getting into it, absolutely wait till September.
Right. So for the more enfranchised casual player, like, what does this do to them? Is this a good thing for them or not?
I think it honestly may depend on. That's a good question. So I think it depends on if there's somebody who has a dream of ever becoming competitive at some point.
Right.
I would say, really, depending on how far you take it, you could honestly ignore 2.0
Oh.
because they're intending the design in mind is that they're still leaving 1.0 as a viable play mode. So if that's what you're married to and just love the collection you have and don't want to spend money on a conversion kit, which I understand they're $50 a pop, because and not just the price, but the fact that it comes with a lot of things that you may not even have.
Right.
Like I would say ignore it if your collection's small enough. Now, if you're tired of 1.0, then definitely look into getting 2.0 and only getting sort of like as many conversion kits, maybe even just one to sort of get into that.
Can I be honest on that?
Yeah,
I think that's a huge mistake by Fantasy
really.
Flight for the conversion kits to be that expensive. If you were
Mm-hmm.
going to make, like, if you are changing the rules in your game, like, I get that they need to make money,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, like, it should be compatible to where what you've already spent your money on can just go straight into it. You should not have to buy a kit to bring those up to date.
This has been a point of contention pretty much since it was announced, really.
Right.
Uh,
Well, I mean, I'm not saying Wizards of the Coast does everything right, but this is one thing Wizards of the Coast does right. Anytime they do major rules changes, they do
mhm.
what's called a rata, where the card, even though they can't change what is said on the card,
Right.
what it is they have a database called Gatherer, which has
Mhm.
the official rules text for any card, and they will change that rules text to reflect the new rules.
Yeah.
And it does not cost the enfranchised player any extra money. So I'm usually really positive on Fantasy Flight, but on that pisses me off a little bit and goes that's just a money grab.
All right. So here's where I disagree with you.
Okay.
So, in terms of, I don't think the conversion kit is a fair comparison to the errata because Fantasy Flight has had their errata in the form of the FAQ for a long time,
Right.
and that's where they've had errata where it's like this is how like it's not it's doing their best to change cards like Hearthstone does,
Right.
but it's like it's clarifying how things work within the rules that they have. The thing with 1.0 though is that it has gotten to the point where there's just been so much and so many things that contradict one another that this is a literal reset button. So anything in 1.0 is almost just it's a clean slate wipe. It's a clean slate through and through.
Right.
And the fact is like it's almost unfair to compare it to Magic because it's cards and miniatures,
Right.
and those have very different markets.
I
And
agree.
when you compare them, the fair one that's been compared to a lot more is Fantasy Flight to Games Workshop and how they do Warhammer 40K.
Oh Lord. Yeah.
And with Warhammer 40K, this is back in the days of buying codexes and having to buy them every few months or so.
Right.
Whereas X-Wing has been around for 5 years now, and this is the first different version of it. And they're also not asking you to buy new models out of the get-go.
Right.
So you can still use all the models you have collected with your ships. And the fact that they also still have not completely gutted 1.0 as a format means you can still keep that, and there's the possibility that they will have 1.0 events.
Right. I still just, man, $50. How many models can you convert for $50?
There is a list. It converts at the very least 2 of everything from the factions, except for the Resistance and First Order stuff, because they're becoming their own factions.
Okay, so $50 covers pretty much the entirety of 1.0.
Yes.
I'm a little more friendly towards that. When you say conversion kits, I'm thinking like 5 to 10 figures, and that would be
right. Yeah,
but no, I'm a little more friendly than that. I'm still not a huge fan of it. But
I have my
more
problems
sense.
with it too.
Yeah.
Like, I think my problem with it is the things that they choose to include the number of is a little wonky. Like, for instance, I think the big point of contention is the Empire one.
Right.
So it has in its conversion kit, it has everything you need to convert up to 4 TIE fighters, which most people have at least 6, if not 8.
Right.
But at the same time, it also has things to convert 2 decimators, 2 Lambda shuttles.
Right. Things that people may have.
Kylo Ren's shuttle. Yeah. It's like, I'm never going to need 2 things of Kylo Ren's shuttle. That's just never going to happen. I'm not a cheese player that plays like 4 shuttles in a match, hilarious as that may be. So I would much rather trade in a second set of Kylo Ren's shuttle upgrades for 4 more TIE fighters.
Makes sense.
So that's where my issue is with it. Otherwise, I have no complaints with the conversion kit setup.
Right. So you think overall though that this would be a good point for new players to get involved.
Absolutely.
It doesn't hurt the casual player.
It's best if you haven't gotten anything, because then you can start buying the core set that comes out in September along with the stuff that's in the Wave 1.
So if you're listening and you've wanted to try X-Wing, this is like the time to do it. Like in September, this is the time to get in. Which, speaking of time to get into things, this week is actually the release for the Magic the Gathering core set M19.
Yep. So, really quick.
Yes, sir.
we said September, the second edition is coming out.
Right.
That's still true, but if you are fortunate enough to attend Gen Con, they are going to have 2.0 on sale there.
Okay. When's Gen Con and where?
August 2nd through August 5th in Indianapolis in the Indiana Convention Center.
All right. So anybody that gets to go to Gen Con, make sure to look for that.
You get Wave 2 early, or version 2.0 early. Not Wave 2. No, we've had that for a while.
Right. But yeah, this week was is the release for the first core set in Magic since Magic Origins. With them going back to the core set. I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time on it because I'm still salty over my Magic collection.
Yeah, as you should be, honestly.
But yeah, so I also want to kind of point that out. So if you have ever had any interest in getting into Magic, core sets are a really good time to do it. Your local game shops are actually going to have starter decks that they give out for free. So
that's pretty good.
You can look those up, go check it out, and hey, even if you don't get into the game, go get a free deck, play it, see if it's something you'd be into. You never know.
Free's free.
Yeah, exactly. But we have run out of time.
Man, that's unfortunate.
That hour went by really quickly.
Yeah, it did.
It is funny how fast time goes by when you're talking about really fun things like being stressed out by pandemic.
And speaking of stress, I didn't even really get to bring up Blood Bowl.
Oh gosh, yeah. We'll have to. Hey, we're gonna have another day where we'll talk a little bit more about some of those other hobby games.
Yeah, if you like football as in miniatures.
Yeah, and killing people.
As it should be played.
If you like killing people, this is the board game for you.
If you ever thought the NFL could be improved with chainsaws and steamrollers, oh boy.
And vampires.
And dinosaur people.
And lizards.
That's what I was referring to.
Oh. And goblins.
And dancing bears.
And orcs.
And elves. 4 varieties of elves.
Oh, it's crazy.
And centaurs.
Blood Bowl is like the most... It's amazing. It is like football on redacted drug here. Exactly. But guys, we have run out of time.
Yep.
So make sure that you check out on Facebook. If you disagree with any of our opinions that we've said on the podcast today, leave
We've
a
put out a
comment.
lot of them.
Yeah, we put out a lot today. But go to Facebook, leave a comment, just like we did Mia at the beginning of the show. We will feature any disagreements that you have with us, at least for now, until it starts to get to where we have too many.
Yep.
We might have to make a second
And,
show
and,
just
and
for the
when you really
disagreements.
start hurting our feelings.
Right. Which Mia, you hurt my feelings. So
No, you didn't.
you need to leave a comment this week apologizing because I am offended. I'm
Wow.
expecting that comment, Mia. I'm looking
That's
at
soft
you.
blackmail.
But make sure you do that. Also, guys, like, share, comment on the post. That's how we grow. We want to keep growing the community, which you guys are amazing. We have more and more of you every week.
There's literally dozens of you.
There are literally dozens of you at this point. So we're proud of you. We're glad to have you. And until next week, stay disgruntled. This is the Disgruntled Geek Podcast, the most honest, critical, and sometimes cynical podcast you will ever hear.
Have a good one.